Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, where we dive into the building blocks of wellness and see what makes our bodies, and occasionally our taste buds, tick. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident observer of the human condition, always ready to share a dry witticism about how we humans keep finding new ways to complicate our diets.
And I'm Alara Sky, the sharp mind with an even sharper tongue. I'm here to mix a dash of humor with a dose of serious health insights, all while probably ruining your next grocery store run by telling you what's actually in some of your favorite foods.
I must say, Ilara, you have a gift for turning a casual shopping trip into an existential crisis, but that's why we appreciate you. Today we're discussing plant-based dairy alternatives and cow's milk. Quite the buzz in today's health circles, yes?
Absolutely. One moment everyone was happily pouring cow's milk over cereal, and the next, entire aisles of almond, soy, and oat alternatives sprang up like a weed invasion. So we're here to explore whether these alternatives really stack up, or if the original, straight from the cow, still reigns supreme.
Let's start by addressing the claim that plant-based milk is automatically healthier. We hear that a lot. It's made from plants, so it must be better for me. But as we know, not all that glitters is green.
Right. Many people assume if it has almond or soy in the name, it's automatically the nutritional equivalent of a kale salad. But in reality, these products undergo a lot of processing. It's like turning a soybean into a rocket ship. You might reach some interesting results, but you sacrifice a lot of original structure along the way.
That's an imaginative picture. I'm now envisioning tiny edamame pods strapped into seatbelts, careening into outer space. But let's get concrete. One issue with plant-based milk is that the protein quality often takes a hit.
Exactly. Cow's milk has all 9 essential amino acids, which are basically the building blocks we need for muscle repair and a host of other bodily functions. Meanwhile, some plant-based options might have drastically lower protein, or less bioavailable protein, because the heat processing and the fancy chemical wizardry degrade those nutrients.
So, what you're saying is that if someone is relying solely on these alternatives for protein, they might be a little shortchanged.
Precisely. A study by the University of Copenhagen compared cow's milk with 10 plant-based drinks and found that a lot of the alternative milks had dismally low protein content, sometimes hovering around 0.4 to 1.1 grams of protein per liter. Meanwhile, cow's milk was at 3.4 grams per liter.
That's a notable difference. If you're going to rely on a daily latte for some protein, it might not do the trick if it's almond or oat-based. But let's not just pick on protein. The vitamin and mineral content also differs substantially, right?
Yes, indeed. Cow's milk is a great natural source of calcium, B vitamins, and even biotin. A lot of the plant-based versions try to fortify, but even then, they usually can't match the synergy of nutrients found in real milk.
Plus, they often come loaded with sugar. Sometimes it's a stealthy brand name that says vanilla or sweetened. And before you know it, you're adding more sugar than you bargained for.
Indeed, the University of Copenhagen found that 7 out of 10 plant-based drinks had more sugar than cow's milk. That's a sly detail. People think they're being healthy, but the sugar fairy is tapping them on the shoulder.
So more sugar, less protein. That's not exactly the wellness trifecta. And let's not forget the additives.
Oh yes, the dreaded list of stabilizers and emulsifiers. Carrageenan, gums, seed oils. These can cause trouble for our gut lining and overall metabolic health. It's like inviting a rowdy friend to a formal dinner. They might look harmless at first, but they cause chaos once the night wears on.
The dreaded rowdy friend. I imagine that's the one who flips the table over after dessert. So, while cow's milk does contain lactose, a sugar of its own, the difference is that lactose is naturally occurring, whereas a lot of plant-based milks get sweetened artificially or with refined sugars.
Exactly. We're not demonizing all forms of sugar, but there's a big difference between the sugar in a fresh strawberry and the sugar you might find poured into a sweetened almond beverage to make it palatable.
Right. Now, let's move on to the big question of processing. We keep hearing that processed foods aren't great for us, but how processed are these alternative milks?
Ultra-processed, in many cases. To make some of these products shelf-stable, they undergo high-temperature treatments, like the ultra-high temperature, UHT process. This can degrade heat-sensitive nutrients and form questionable compounds, like acrylamide.
Acrylamide. That's the substance we often hear about in the context of burnt toast and roasted coffee beans. Now, it's popping up in plant-based milks.
Indeed, and it's not something to ignore. The Maillard reaction, which gives us that lovely browned flavor in cooked foods, can also create harmful byproducts, especially at higher temperatures. Some of these byproducts can increase inflammation or even be linked to higher risk of certain diseases.
Meanwhile, raw, grass-fed dairy basically shows up with minimal fuss. Sure, standard pasteurized milk goes through some heating, but raw milk, especially from well-cared-for cows, is basically the definition of a whole food.
Precisely. Raw or gently treated, full-fat dairy from grass-fed cows has beneficial odd-chain saturated fatty acids and can offer immune-boosting properties. It's like nature's own multivitamin in a milky package.
Let's not forget about the presence of the milk fat globule membrane. That might sound like a sci-fi term, but I hear it helps support gut health.
It does. MFGM, as it's called, helps in strengthening the gut barrier. Meanwhile, many plant-based milks rely heavily on polyunsaturated fats, often from seed oils loaded with linoleic acid. That can cause mitochondrial mayhem in excess.
I can almost see the poor mitochondria waving a white flag, begging for relief. So, we keep hearing that plant-based milks are friendlier to the environment, but is that the entire story?
The environmental picture is complex. Almond milk, for example, demands a ton of water, especially in drought-prone areas. And if you're importing soy or oats from across the globe, that leaves a carbon footprint too.
So it's not as black and white as plants good, cows bad. There's nuance to be had.
Always. Now, let's talk about ultra-processed foods more broadly. Studies have shown that a higher intake of ultra-processed foods can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. And guess what many plant-based milks are? Ultra-processed.
So if you're swapping cow's milk for something that's basically a science experiment in a carton, you might be setting yourself up for more heart risk, not less.
Exactly. There was a study in the Lancet Regional Health Europe showing that plant-based ultra-processed foods were linked to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. So ironically, you can be well-intentioned about your health choices, but if you're defaulting to that rainbow of plant-based milk cartons, you might be doing more harm than good.
Meanwhile, actual fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are beneficial. But the moment we transform them into these sophisticated potions, we might lose the natural synergy that made them healthy in the first place.
Yes, synergy is a huge concept in nutrition. There's a reason a whole almond is different from almond milk that's been heated, milled, emulsified, and sweetened. The final product is practically a new creature.
Speaking of new creatures, let's talk about odd-chain saturated fatty acids like C15-0 and C17-0. These are found in dairy fat, right?
Yes, they are, and they're not only rare but also crucial. Studies suggest C15-0 might be so important it could be viewed as an essential fatty acid. People with higher levels of these odd-chain fatty acids in their blood have lower risks of various health issues, including obesity, cardiovascular disease, and even type 2 diabetes.
That's fascinating. So, the type of saturated fat in milk might actually be protective. For years we heard, oh, saturated fat is the enemy. But it turns out there's more nuance.
Exactly. Not all saturated fats are created equal. Milk from grass-fed cows is especially interesting because those cows convert the grass's nutrients into these beneficial fatty acids.
So you're telling me the real star of the show might be an odd-chain saturated fatty acid in a tall glass of raw milk, while we keep hearing about how wonderful soy lattes are.
Yes, nothing against a good latte, but if you're going for daily nutrition, raw or full-fat dairy can be far more beneficial in the grand scheme.
Let's also highlight the fact that a lot of people choose plant-based milks because they can't tolerate lactose. But that's a separate conversation from whether these products are nutritionally superior.
Right. Lactose intolerance is a real thing, and some folks genuinely can't handle cow's milk. But many can do better with raw dairy because the enzymes are still intact, making digestion easier. The process of pasteurization can kill those helpful enzymes.
That's an important distinction. Some individuals find raw milk easier on their system than pasteurized milk. Meanwhile, they might not realize that some plant-based alternatives still cause gut issues due to the additives.
Exactly. Carrageenan, gums, seed oils, these can create intestinal permeability, leading to inflammation. So they might think they're escaping dairy issues, only to end up with a new set of problems.
Let's address the environmental question more thoroughly. People often say dairy cows produce greenhouse gases, or that dairy takes a lot of land. But the water usage for almond production or the deforestation for soy can also be detrimental.
Precisely. Plus, regenerative farming practices for dairy cows can actually improve soil health and sequester carbon. There's no single silver bullet. It depends on how each system is managed.
So, we come back to that word nuance. Don't just switch to a plant-based milk because you read a single headline. Consider the entire supply chain and your own nutrient needs.
Couldn't have said it better. Another angle. The idea that if we're trying to cut back on sugar or improve metabolic health, leaning on sweetened oat milk might not help. Some of these oat drinks have a surprisingly high glycemic index.
It's basically sugar water with a sprinkle of oats. That's an oversimplification, but it's not far off.
Exactly. And that's not to bash oats. A whole bowl of oatmeal made from steel-cut oats is a nourishing meal. But once you heavily process it, you're left with something else entirely.
Let's bring back the Maillard reaction for a moment. This reaction can create some tasty flavors, like the crust on bread, but also forms advanced glycation end products, or AGEs.
right? Ages can accumulate in the body, contributing to oxidative stress and inflammation. In these high-heat, ultra-processed plant-based milks, you may get more ages than if you drank raw cow's milk.
So, while we're savoring that roasted almond flavor in the beverage, we're also consuming potentially harmful byproducts.
Precisely. Now, let's highlight some of the health benefits specifically tied to whole raw dairy. First, there's that beneficial bacteria content. Raw milk can come with probiotics that support gut health.
And that can translate to a stronger immune system. Meanwhile, we keep hearing about these immune-boosting properties unique to grass-fed dairy.
Right. Cows that graze on grass and soak up sunlight produce milk rich in conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, as well, which has its own benefits when consumed in moderation.
So we have beneficial probiotics, beneficial fats, and minimal processing. That's quite a trifecta.
Indeed. There's also a synergy in natural foods. When you keep the milk whole, meaning you don't remove the fat, homogenize it, or subject it to high heat, the body recognizes it as a balanced food.
Meanwhile, our beloved plant-based alternatives are so manipulated that they're more like chemistry projects.
That's a fair way to put it. Still, if someone loves the taste of almond milk or can't handle any form of dairy, I'm not saying never drink it. But it's critical to understand what you're missing out on nutritionally.
And to keep an eye on those labels because the additives can be surprising. We see words like gellan gum, xanthan gum, or a random seed oil.
Right. If it sounds like something from a science fiction novel, proceed with caution.
Let's shift gears for a moment to talk about the marketing phenomenon. Plant-based anything has become a huge trend, often sold as the morally and physically superior option. But that's an oversimplification.
Indeed. The marketing has done wonders. People see a green leaf on the label and assume they're doing the planet a favor. But that's not necessarily true if, for instance, the product's water and resource usage is massive, or if it's shipped from the other side of the world.
So we're back to reading the fine print, understanding where our food comes from, and not relying on feel-good labels to guide our choices.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about some specifics. Almond milk often involves huge water usage, especially in drought-affected regions like California. Soy milk has concerns about genetically modified soy and deforestation. Oat milk can have high sugar content and might be heavily processed.
Meanwhile, local, grass-fed dairy might actually have a smaller footprint if done regeneratively. It's all in the details.
Absolutely. Another hidden gem is that raw milk can sometimes have a better taste profile. People often say it's creamier, richer, and more flavorful than processed milk.
So beyond nutrition, there's a flavor factor. The real deal might just taste better, which is always a plus.
Agreed. Now let's not forget that some people have ethical concerns about dairy, especially if they object to how cows are treated. That's a separate moral discussion. But from a purely nutritional standpoint, cow's milk, especially raw, organic, grass-fed, offers a superior profile compared to these heavily processed plant milks.
Right? If ethics is the main reason for someone avoiding dairy, that's their choice. But if their reason is strictly, it's healthier, the conversation is more nuanced.
Precisely. Another point. The same study from the University of Copenhagen found that many plant-based milks lacked essential amino acids, even after fortification. So you can't just rely on them for complete protein.
If someone's on a mostly plant-based diet already, skipping cow's milk might compound any gaps in essential amino acids.
Exactly. And then if you're also relying on processed forms of plant protein, like certain meat substitutes, that might further reduce overall protein quality.
This points to the importance of a well-rounded diet. Even if someone doesn't eat dairy, they need to be strategic about where they're getting all 9 essential amino acids.
Yes, especially for kids or older adults who need sufficient protein for growth or muscle maintenance. Plant-based milks aren't going to be their best friend in that department.
Now, let's revisit the notion that some of these milks have a shelf life that seems suspiciously long. If it can sit out forever, it's probably ultra-stabilized.
That's right. Real milk spoils. It's a living food, teeming with natural enzymes and bacteria. When a product can last for months without refrigeration, you have to ask, what did they do to it?
And that's where the acrylamide and other advanced glycation end products might come into play. Long shelf life can be code for heavily heated or chemically treated.
Exactly. While convenience is nice, it often comes at a cost.
Let's wrap up by summarizing some key points. First, plant-based milks are generally more processed, lower in protein, and often have added sugars and other ingredients that can be detrimental to health.
Second, cow's milk, particularly raw and grass-fed, is a whole food with naturally occurring nutrients. It contains essential amino acids, beneficial fats like C15-0, and can even have probiotic qualities if it's raw.
Third, the environmental argument is more nuanced than marketing might suggest. Some plant-based milks require substantial resources like water, and shipping can add to their carbon footprint.
Fourth, Ultra-processed foods are linked to higher risks of cardiovascular disease. Many of these plant-based options fall under that ultra-processed umbrella.
Right. So if you enjoy almond milk, we're not telling you to throw it out the window immediately, but do so with full awareness of what it is and what it isn't.
Precisely. And if you can tolerate dairy, raw, or gently pasteurized full-fat milk from grass-fed cows, can provide a wealth of health benefits that these processed alternatives simply can't replicate.
In other words, if you're going for nutritional bang for your buck, consider real dairy. If you need or want a plant-based option, realize you may need additional sources of protein and nutrients.
Exactly. I recommend folks do their own due diligence. Check the source of your dairy, see how the cows are raised, and find out what's in your preferred plant-based milk if you go that route.
Knowledge is power, and sometimes that power means ignoring the marketing slogans on the front of the box, flipping it around, and reading the fine print.
Very true. So, to all of you who have braved the grocery store aisle of bewildering milk alternatives, remember you hold the final say. Milk doesn't have to be complicated, but we manage to make it so.
Indeed we do. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of dairy versus plant-based alternatives. I'm Ethan Foster, reminding you that sometimes old-fashioned might actually mean better for you.
And I'm Alara Sky, suggesting that your next latte might be worth reevaluating, unless you're partial to scientific brews with acrylamide undertones. Thanks for joining us on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom.
We'll be back soon with more insights into the microscopic forces shaping our health. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and maybe give that grass-fed cow a little nod of gratitude.
Absolutely. See you next time, folks. Keep questioning labels and choosing foods that truly support your well-being.
Take care, everyone. And remember, sometimes the simplest choice, like milk straight from a healthy cow, can be the wisest.